until we can get that sorted out. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Zach Gordon. So, if WordPress can ship Gutenberg documentation, I can give a talk on the data API without a computer. Yeah. So we're going to start this, if at least it reminds me of teaching at college, right? I'm going to get some whiteboard markers. I'll just draw all the code for you. So they're going to hopefully fix it all up, but we'll just start at a high level and I'll do the best I can. If you go to javascript.wp.com / the Wordcamp WCMIA-2019. JavaScript.wp.com / WCMIA-2019. At least you have all the slides in the code repo, okay? So I'll try to like roughly walk us through this. You know, go to the next slide. I'm going to get up on my phone. Let's see if I can see it too. All right, how many of y'all have played with the data API? How many of y'all know what it even is yet? Okay, cool. We'll pull this up and we'll just go through this together. It's all good. We got a little bit extra time today, so we don't have to rush this. Those slides are coming up for you, right? Yes. Okay. Remember what the slides are? It's javascript.wp.com / WCMIA-2019. If I could even just write that up, we'd be better off. Okay. All right, so this talk today is called Everything You Can Do with the New Redux-Based JavaScript Data API in WordPress. So WordPress, well, let's go to the next slide. Go next. I'm Zach Gordon. My background is in education, as they gave a wonderful introduction for. And I've had a lot of focus lately on JavaScript. I've had a really cool chance to work with a lot of the core folks that are building Gutenberg in order to try to understand and help teach what is going on, because as some of you may know, like the documentation, you try to Google search something, and it's a little hard to find at the moment. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and a lot of what I'm building up to the data API, which is a really cool system. So you'll see if you go to the next slide, it's a definition of Redux, or the data API is a state management system for WordPress, and it's in JavaScript. So a program is considered stateful if it can remember things. Right? That's a pretty simple definition. So you've probably been working with stateful applications, even if you never had a JavaScript state object normally, right? The information that a stateful application remembers is called the state. And the tendency in JavaScript now is to have literally just one variable called state, and then all the information that can change from user information, from different data that you need to keep track of, all of that gets stored inside of one object. So it gets incredibly big. And different libraries have existed, like Angular ships with its own state management system built in. React has a very small state management, but it's not global, so it's only very localized. What they decided to do is, because they were using React, which we already have before, Redux is a very commonly paired state management system for working with React. But you don't need to, okay? So when we hear Redux, all that is it's actually a very small library. If you ever watch the ACAD course from the creator of it, which I highly recommend, there's a free course on Redux from the creator. He shows you how he built it from scratch with vanilla JavaScript, so you can really understand. But that thing is crazy complicated. Look, to just update one piece of little data, you have to write like 4 different types of functions, and they're not normal functions. Mark's shaking his head, right? It gets complicated. And a lot of folks jumped onto the bandwagon of Redux only to realize, wait, this is a terrible idea unless you have a lot of complexity of data, or it's worth a lot of boilerplate code to spin up in order to keep track of everything. Now, WordPress is a really good example. It is a full application. You don't just roll your own small data. It makes a lot of sense to use an existing state management system. But what they did, I'm going a little off slides here. I'm just going to bring it to it. Oh, we got a marker. At least get to code. So what they did was they chose Redux, and then they built their own state management system using Redux. How many of y'all have used Redux before? Okay, so you can go in and plug into their system and use Redux exactly how you know it, which is awesome. For the rest of us, though, WordPress did a beautiful thing. They created functions for every single thing Redux could do. So in the traditional WordPress way, right, like we don't write a SQL query to get the content. What do? Write the _ content. So in order to get all the blocks in the editor with the data API, what do? You just put get blocks. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of complexity there. Some of that stuff is just managed in JavaScript. Some of it is making API endpoints. And you got slide. Oh, but there's no monitor, so it's just that. Okay. Teach with my back to you. It's okay. We're still kind of getting through the introductory stuff. Data API, all of these things. Okay, so the really cool slide, flip through those slides until you see one that lists a whole bunch of stuff that you could get. So that's at a high level, but there's a very specific thing. Y'all seeing what I'm talking about, like 2 columns? Okay, look through all those. Just take a minute to look through them all. There's things like, you can get the authors. You could get, there's a really new term in WordPress state management called entities. Entities could be a post, it could be a page, it could be a media item. So this is a new term that we haven't had before. So you could get anything by just typing a JavaScript function.
Sorry,
yeah.
Can we work with that? I know it's not the monitor, but
if I could work with the
Gutenberg
documentation.
Consider a drive while you speak.
No, I think this is good. Y'all don't mind if I see my backside a little bit, do you?
No worries.
Do you need a clicker? Yeah, do you need a clicker to advance? Or?
No, because I'm going to want this keyboard to just like teaching. Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah. Okay.
There's a JavaScript analogy. It sucks! Oh, by the way, while we're taking this moment to make us not look like what we're doing, please remember to use My Talk Rocks to give Zach a note of encouragement and to make sure that he can come back next year. Because after this, we're not so sure.
I broke out.
He works cheap. This is
okay, cool. Okay, so this is the slide I'm talking about. Perfect time. A round of applause for it. Okay. Go Wordcamp. So we can get all of this data now. Just take a moment. I won't read all of it off to you, but you could get an idea for all of this type of stuff. Now, some of this has a direct translation to stuff that you could get in PHP. Like we could do a WP query and get a whole bunch of data. We could do an entities query and get a whole bunch of data. Some of this stuff is very specific just to the editor, right? Right now, Gutenberg is the editor. Soon it's going to become widget areas, then it's going to become a customizer. Eventually, I believe it'll just become the front end of your site. If you could build your site a certain way, they should just be able to overlay that sucker right there, and you're good to go. We're not there yet, but I don't know, Gutenberg v4, is that completely a thing?
It's not what it's used now.
What specifically?
Like, we'd be able to edit in front of the websites.
Yeah, front end editing, yeah. Bring up Wix, man. Okay, we talked about that. Okay. So the way that Redux works is, I said that usually you have one state object, right? But that state will sometimes have a few different sections in it that you could drill down into. Or it could be that you have 4 or 5 completely different state objects. There's a lot of flexibility with how you can build it. So WordPress 4 ships with these following data modules, or modules I think is what they refer to them as. So different ones you can imagine are going to get different things. The core one is general things, like if we want to query getting entities, we've got to query the core data API module. If we want to do annotations, so now you can go into the rich text editor and create your own, like highlight this, and then I want to have a special button that interacts. Annotations are edits within the rich text editor area itself. You can get access. Now, if we come down into blocks, you can hack any single block. You can get all the block data of any block and find out information and kind of edit it on the fly. That is super powerful. Also super dangerous. There's a lot of risk of breaking things if used incorrectly, but you know, one line of PHP, you break the whole site, so that's not what we do. The block editor UI, then we get into stuff that only really is going to matter inside of the editor itself. Right? So you spin it up, and then it's going to have a whole bunch of data. But that data is only existing while the editor is spun up. So one of the interesting things, just a random side note, like every block in the editor has a unique ID. but that ID is unique every single time you refresh the page. So there's a lot of state management that is not tied to a database. So you can go look up a block ID in WordPress. It would be really cool if every piece, if every block is uniquely identified, then we could do queries and get like specific blocks for everything. Some people have played with this and done other options, but it's not there yet. So some of this data we can't get outside the editor. That's important to remember. Then we get down into like any notice, you hook into that. Have you seen when you launch a WordPress site, it pops up and says like, hey, welcome to the editor, you want to start navigating around? You can now use this for your own projects. So if you install a plugin, you can use a like default WordPress like welcome screen to like guide people through, which is a pretty cool experience. Then there's some stuff on the viewport, the size of the screen. There's not really much in that one, but the really powerful thing is plugins can roll your own. So now you can, just as you would build a really complex, and when your blocks get super complex, or if you're building a plugin page outside of the editor, or even on the front end of the site, you could still leverage your own kind of Redux version. All right, so that's like half of the entire talk. It was like everything you could do, right? Here's half of everything you could do. But it wouldn't be a nerdy talk if we didn't get into some code, right? Come on. So, I might cover part of this. I have animation for a second. Okay, so I want to show you how to get this. What happens in WordPress is like breaks every single convention of good JavaScript standards. They took the entire React library, they took the entire React DOM library, and then they took all of Redux and they threw it into the global namespace of the window object. So if you go to window.wp, you get access to like a billion libraries right there in the browser. Now, why do they tell you not to do? Does anybody know? Anybody tell us why this is a potentially bad idea to put things in the window object? Hold on, let me back up and explain. The window object is something that the browser keeps track of variables in. And when you put something in that window object, then any single JavaScript file has access to not just read it, but override it. Yeah. I kind of gave away the answer, but right? So I could go in, and if I enqueue my plugin a certain way, I can overwrite React to be Jquery. Like, what are you going to do now, WordPress? Right? So this is not, and let's just hope, but again, this isn't anything new. One plugin can bring out an entire site now. So we're not really, I mean, it breaks some JavaScript conventions, but we're not really in that different a scenario as before. But the cool thing about this is that now on any page, and there's a little caveat to that, but you could type wp.data.select, and then you get access to the entire Redux store. And this is how you would select the different modules. So we have the core, then core/blocks, core/editor, core/editor, and I'll show you in a minute how you find this out. This part is documented at least. And then each one of these, so if I go in and I run console log, or I just open up, any of y'all have a WordPress site running? Open up the editor now and type wp.data.select in the console, you know, your JavaScript console, and don't put a function. If you just hit this, it'll give you every single function available. So you can on the fly find out every function that's available to us. How do you do that in PHP now, folks? How do you find every single function in WordPress in PHP? Well, tricky, right? So this is kind of cool because it gives us a quick access. I can just jump in there and start looking at what I've got. I've thrown a few what I think are good examples. Core, you can get the authors, and that's as simple as it is. The Redux call for this would be way more complicated. So let's all be really grateful that they didn't just drop Redux in. That's what they did with React, but they actually built a new state management system and gave us these really easy to use functions so that we don't have to worry about all these queries. Get block types. What do you think that's going to do? It's going to get a certain type of block. Now blocks, a paragraph is a block type. An image is a block type. So when we talk about a block type, we're talking about the type of block. Yeah, it makes sense to say that. We can get all the blocks in the editor. We can get the current post ID, which is something really hard, right? Like some blocks need to know what post I'm working with. How do you do that? You query the page URL. What if they haven't saved yet? So that's a little unreliable. So we have some helpful things. And then you can start to see, like, if I want to get the notices that are available, what do? I go to the notices one. So my warning to you is, like, what may happen at first is you keep trying, like, core/editor.getBlocks. Because you're like, shouldn't the editor be able to get blocks? Well, no. And there's some reasoning behind it, and if you read all the functions, you get an idea of what direction they're going. But it'll just be one of those things that you learn anew, right? We learned a ton of template tags and all of that in WordPress. We learned a ton of hooks. Now we learned a ton of new functions with the data API. Okay, we don't usually write it like this. What we usually do is this. So we destructure select from WP data, normally type wp.data.select. Well, this first line will let you just use select on its own to refer to wp.data.select. And then we get our blocks, we can save that when we want it. And so we can literally just, if you open up the Gutenberg editor now, and you throw some blocks on a page, and you open up your console, just type this code, and it'll give you access to all the blocks on the block. It's every single piece of data for every single block. It's really cool how much we cram into state now. So in memory, in JavaScript, is every single block on the page, all the information about it, and the ability to modify all of it, which is really, really powerful. Keep walking up here to change it. Speaker box. Okay, so let's look at some code, which I would do on my computer, but luckily we have a GitHub repo that I can just and this should be linked on that page already, so. All right, what am I showing you? Yeah. How many of y'all have done a block before? Oh dear, okay. Deep breaths. Just yoga. Because first you have to learn you learn how to build a block, then get into the data API. I think like that's a fair order. Usually makes sense, but it's all right. Wordcamp, we're going to do some deep dive, right? Okay, so I just want to show you, this is a block. Here's my title, here's how I set up a block. If you haven't built a block before, it's just this one JavaScript file, and you call a function to register a block. We give it a unique name, title, description, category, doesn't have anything in code, and then a bunch of this. Anybody use React yet? Oh my gosh, that was the coolest thing ever. Last year, I started a book, and it just got published on the You can't buy it yet, because all the formatting accidentally got removed. This is the beta version, but it's free for anybody. I came to give it away if you don't mind. Throw it. As excited as I am, I think sorry, so some of you have seen it. This is React code for just call me a function called select demo. This is React code for call me a function called subscribe. And each of these I have set up into their own little functions, or their own little files. So this is really good way to design your blocks. Once your blocks start to get this big, you start breaking them up into smaller files. Who here writes plugins and themes in just like one gigantic file? How long is your functions.php, y'all?
Years.
Right? So you should really be breaking it up into smaller reusable stuff, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to show you one little function that demonstrates how to select something. Okay. This is the translation. I'll use underscore for PHP, right?
Yeah.
Wag my finger at anybody who doesn't. Okay, good. Everybody said yes. Good. All right, so we get our select from the global window object, crazy. And then we set up a function. This is just a normal function. And here we get our count of our blocks. So we can see I'm selecting the core editor, getting all my blocks. And then I come down here and I display my block count. So although the data API is quite complicated, and I do encourage you to build a block before you start getting into this, y'all, the super cool thing is it's just a function. Just a function. We could rock with that, right? That's not too bad. Now the problem with this, let me just, oh no, hold on. I need to look up my Pantheon URL because luckily I was able to spin up a site so that I can try to demo these. Oh, I missed that. Yo, I gotta shout out to Pantheon. Are Pantheon people here? Their teams. There we go. They sponsored me to come here. I wasn't able to come before, and now I'm really excited, so thank you for that. Dev Advanced Gutenberg course. Oh no, I don't even know the login. That was so close.
No, you don't have to log in. Just do .pantheonsite.io.
But I want to get to the editor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shoot. This would be really better demoed live, but I will just point out some factors to you. Okay. So what happens is I call this this is executing in a block, right? So I put a bunch of blocks, and then I add this block, and it gives me a number of all the blocks on the page. When I add another block, this doesn't get updated. That's a problem, right? So if we call select, it's going to execute once as soon as that block or plugin, if you have a sidebar and you call it in the sidebar, when you open that sidebar, it'll call, but it'll never get updated. Okay? So another function exists called with select. And what you do with select is I take this whole block of code, this whole function here, I take this function, and I call with select, and I pass this into with select, and then I can use block count in it, and it'll always stay updated. This is a rather complex structure of functional programming called using higher order components, where you pass functions into functions, and then they cause them to do different things. But if I show you the code, well, the code's still going to be a little confusing. Anybody use higher order components in React yet? This one's for you, ready? With select demo. Okay, so I build my normal function already, and I say, hey, I'm going to get block count. I just assume that somebody's going to pass it in. This is just a parameter. And then right here, I call block count. Down at the bottom of the page, when I export this component, or this function, I call with select. So I'm actually exporting with select function being called, but I pass into it this. So this is calling one function that does a bunch of stuff, and then it's chained, and then all the stuff that I just did gets passed into here, which means that I get access to it here. So here I'm calling, okay, with select is returning block count. This is complicated, y'all, but I'm going to try to break it down. And the nice thing is you just copy and paste this code. You don't have to write this stuff by yourself. This is approved by the Gutenberg staff. They're like, yes, this is okay. They can copy and paste this. So with select demo, we set up our select call here. We return this value. Let me see if I can think. Well, no, I won't make it more complicated. If I want to get more stuff, I just keep adding things here. This is just a normal JavaScript object, so I comment delineate, and I just keep putting more and more and more. The great thing about this is that now in my little piece of code, anytime blocks get updated, even if I've already been added to the page, it'll rehydrate itself. It'll rehydrate itself. So sometimes you only need to call that once. Like, I just need to figure out how many things there are, and then I need to do something with them, right? But a lot of times with the data API, you need to keep that data fresh, and you need to always have that persistent. So you use this component architecture in order to accomplish that. Otherwise, your code is not going to be reliable, right, if it just executes once. How are we doing on time, my friend? Go.
Less
10 minutes?
less than 10 minutes.
Okay, so this is only half of what Redux can do inside of WordPress. The other half is not only can we get data, but we can actually call and execute actions that happen. So this is called in, this is all Reduxy term, dispatching actions. What it really is just like calling a function, an action hook, right? Something where you can put in your own code to execute or run. And they made it super simple. Once again, these are all the things that we can get, but these are all the actions we can take. So I can add and remove block code, show and hide block code. Wait, sorry, read this a second. Read so much that read every line. Just stay, get deep. It's pretty cool, right? So WordPress built itself on top of its own API, which is how we should do things, right? So basically, the end goal, and we'll see the slide later, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, is that hopefully the goal is anything that WordPress can do, we can do programmatically now. So anything a user could click on and drag or do, we could do. We could do order blocks, we could move them around. I could grab your block, change the data, put it at the end, put it at the beginning, duplicate your block. Every time you type a word, I could create 3 more blocks, right? You could do pretty much anything programmatically. Let me show you the code sample real quick for this. It's the same pattern. I get dispatch, which is the function at the top. And then I call dispatch core editor remove a block. Now there's a bit more code going on here that we don't have the time to get into, but basically any of those actions. Okay, the problem is, and I'm skipping ahead, but this is super important. This is all well and good. This is all super cool, but the documentation. So I'm calling all of you to like, please try to help with this as you learn. And I need to do better too. But what am I going to try to show you? Okay, let's just pull up the Gutenberg handbook real quick. This will be the last thing before. This is the official, as far as I know, documentation, right, of Gutenberg. We come into here. If we come down to data module reference, so here's all the data APIs, and this is updated dynamically. So if WordPress adds another one, which I'm sure they will at some point, it'll automatically be here. But let's come into like the core editor, and we can see all the functions. So get authors, that's pretty simple. Well, let's come down to our actions to update something. Save entity records. Okay, how do I save a record, right? I want to know, how do I save a post on the fly? That would be super cool. I create a block where they can create posts inside of that block or on the sidebar, right? Okay, I get the kind. What are my kind options? The name of it. How do I know its name? And what record? What format do you want it? That's it, y'all. If you look in the Gutenberg source code, they don't even use this. So there's nowhere that you can go to find this. Like you end up just searching all of GitHub for like, who's using it, which you folks are, like usually plugin developers who are on GitHub that you can find. But in closing, like this is kind of the tricky part, is that they're super easy functions to use, but they're not super well documented yet. And even if you know Redux, it can be a little bit tricky digging through them. About there on time.
Sorry, you have 5 minutes left on your count.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure we get time for questions and stuff. This is kind of blazing through. I will mention code-wise, there's another thing called with dispatch. So this is the exact same. This is not doing it.
Top of the screen. Middle of the screen.
Yeah, but this is just the name of the block.
Oh.
Okay. There is a with dispatch, but with dispatch isn't as necessary, right? Because data that you get, you need it to be populated. But when you're calling an action, like WordPress has not updated its source code to do something different with that action than when you first loaded the page, unless you've had it up a really long time, right? So with dispatch is a little bit less necessary. I can and would love to go into, what's that, do it, okay, last minute. More complex things like with compose. So with compose will allow you to combine with select and with dispatch. There are also things called with state, which will allow you to add state to just a little component. I know this is over most folks' heads, but for those who it's sticking with, hopefully that's cool stuff. And this is a native or out there normal library. So this is using very common language if you're coming from the Redux world into WordPress. If not, like it doesn't matter. We're learning new stuff anyway, so we just learn this and we don't even need to know that it's Redux. Which is sweet. Like, yeah, it turns out, learn JavaScript deeply. Not true. You don't need to. You can learn it just as shallowly as you have everything else up until now. You'll still get yourself into trouble, but you can get away with a lot. Okay, what else did I want to say? On that note, I'm out. Yeah, so the docs are where it's at, but there's been a lot of folks contributing. If you contribute to the docs, you're part of a core contributor, right? Is that true? You're a doc? Yeah, like I said, it's true. I am super excited about this, especially as someone who digs JavaScript, because now it means I'm not using stupid admin Ajax, and I don't have to set up all my own custom endpoints and write fetch queries every time I want to, and have to worry about timers to re-update data. I just call a function, and that's the WordPress way, and it's really cool that this exists. I thank you all for coming. I do have a course on this, by the way, and there's a 50% discount if you want to get it. I also have a 12-minute tutorial on YouTube if you just search for the data API that goes into all this and shows like really good code samples and stuff and some crossover from there. So I wish you all the best. Good luck with all of this. Yes, you do have to learn JavaScript at some point now, but it isn't as hard as you might think. So, thank you all.
You have 5 minutes.
So you're using the word state a lot, but I'm not seeing like REST or KOS or any of that. It's a different kind of state than the kind of some of us might have for.
Absolutely, yeah, we're calling it in the JavaScript specific context where it is a very long page in memory that's holding data.
Now, also, I'm coming from the Angular world, and so it's all basically the React paradigm for writing code.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're the one to answer this, but if we're going to go down the route where jQuery is a lot older than it should be, does it keep up with like React hooks and some of the newer context API things like that? Are we going to get that with the WordPress 4 updates as well?
You mean updating jQuery or getting?
Yeah, like jQuery has an older version typically. WordPress is not on 3.31. You know, I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah.
I don't want to fall down that path with React where I don't get to use the latest and
It
greatest.
is, so that's a really good thing. They copied and pasted every single function from React into their version of it, and we don't have hooks yet, and they are, I think that they'll be much more responsive of that, and there's a PR request for it, and they will look at it. But that is important to remember, and this isn't the talk to do it. You can't ship React into WordPress. You need to make sure that you just use their version of React, and it is not the actual version of React, even though it's really close. So, yeah, I think it'll happen a lot faster.
There's a lot of plugins on their page, custom blocks. Are all these custom blocks available to these selected functions?
So, most blocks do not create their own data APIs. But you can access any block using cores and get the data from it, but it might have extra data like, I don't know off the top of my head some of them that are doing Ghost or something.
You select blocks, and there's custom blocks that come from plugins as well.
You still get all of it, yeah.
Still get, okay.
Can you still use the same dev tools that you use for Redux that you can with this, or do you need also?
Yeah, no, same ones, and even in the browser, you can use the Redux tooling. And one of the cool things about Redux is it remembers the history. So I can go back and watch every single thing that you did on the page and forward, both programmatically and in the browser with the Redux Chrome exception. So all the same, which is really cool. Yeah, I don't know how to prove that. Anything else, Noel?
How close is Redux different than React? Is it a part of React?
Completely separate library. It was just built both by Facebook.
Okay.
And they were built to work. You actually have to use another library to connect the two of them. Most people do, but they're very different, but they're usually used together. They come from the same ecosystem, I guess I'd say.
Where can I buy your pants?
They don't sell them there. These came from India. But hairpants.com is an actual website. Yeah.
Are you coming out with a patch for your hat that says not so?
So I do want to start looking at teaching JavaScript to the masses, and I'm going to need a new catchphrase. That's the wrong approach. Not so deeply. Open suggestions. Y'all, I'm happy to talk any of this stuff. Please come find me, and would love to, especially if you're taking a course, come say hi to you if you need. So thank you all very much.